Sometimes the most iconic songs in music history carry stories far stranger than the music itself. Few cases illustrate this better than Bittersweet Symphony by the Verve. What began as a 4-bar sample blossomed into one of the most celebrated anthems of the 1990s, only to become entangled in a legal battle so ruthless that it has since been described as one of the greatest thefts in modern music history. This is the tale of how a forgotten Rolling Stones orchestral cover became the foundation of a Britpop masterpiece, and how lawyers, contracts, and managers almost buried its legacy. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more music history that hits all the right notes. In 1965, the Rolling Stones released a single titled "The Last Time." Like much of their early work, it leaned heavily on gospel and blues influences. Though it was a hit at the time, you'd be forgiven for listening to it today and thinking it bears little resemblance to Bittersweet Symphony. And you'd be right, the connection lies elsewhere. The missing link is the Andrew Loog Oldham Orchestra. Andrew Loog Oldham, the Stones' manager in the mid-1960s, had a side project, producing orchestral adaptations of popular songs. One of these records, the Rolling Stones Songbook, included a sweeping instrumental version of "The Last Time." This record faded into obscurity, largely forgotten for decades, until it was rediscovered 30 years later. In 1965, the Rolling Stones released a single titled "The Last Time." Like much of their early work, it leaned heavily on gospel and blues influences. Though it was a hit at the time, you'd be forgiven for listening to it today and thinking it bears little resemblance to Bittersweet Symphony. And you'd be right, the connection lies elsewhere. The missing link is the Andrew Loog Oldham Orchestra. Andrew Loog Oldham, the Stones' manager in the mid-1960s, had a side project, producing orchestral adaptations of popular songs. One of these records, the Rolling Stones Songbook, included a sweeping instrumental version of "The Last Time." This record faded into obscurity, largely forgotten for decades, until it was rediscovered 30 years later. Since the song was built upon a pre-existing recording, the Verve sought permission to use the sample. They approached Decca Records, which owned the rights to the Oldham Orchestra recording, and negotiated a deal. Both parties agreed to split royalties 50-50. That might have been the end of the story, but just as the single was preparing for release, another figure entered the picture: Alan Klein. Klein, a former Stones manager from the 1960s, owned the publishing rights to "The Last Time." He claimed the Verve had used more of the sample than they had agreed upon. More controversially, he argued that the vocal melody of Bittersweet Symphony was essentially a slowed-down version of the Rolling Stones' original. Suddenly, the Verve weren't just facing a simple copyright issue. They were accused of stealing a song outright. Ashcroft and his bandmates knew they were cornered. The single was ready to be released, and there was no time or legal room to fight a prolonged battle. It was a no-win situation, Ashcroft admitted. The song deserved to be heard at the end of the day. The song's bigger than me, bigger than the band. Bittersweet Symphony was released in the summer of 1997 and quickly became the Verve's biggest hit. It defined the Britpop era, soaring up charts around the world. Yet while the band basked in the success, the lawsuit pressed forward. When Alan Klein saw how massive the song had become, he moved the goalposts again. He no longer wanted a share of royalties. He wanted all of it. Eventually, the case was settled out of court. The outcome was devastating for the Verve. Richard Ashcroft was forced to relinquish all songwriting credits and 100% of royalties to Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, even though neither had contributed a single note to the track. Ashcroft later quipped bitterly, "This is the best song Jagger and Richards have written in 20 years." The insult deepened when Bittersweet Symphony was nominated for a Grammy in the category of Best Song. The names on the ballot? Jagger and Richards. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, for their part, stayed out of the dispute. The rights weren't in their hands, but in those of Klein's company, ABKCO. Still, the optics were uncomfortable. Two of the biggest rock icons in history credited for a song they hadn't written, while the true author was sidelined. Alan Klein was infamous for such tactics. Known as one of the most ruthless businessmen in music, he had built a reputation for aggressive legal maneuvers and hardball negotiations. Many artists he worked with, including the Stones and the Beatles, eventually came to distrust or even despise him. Others, too, felt wronged by the handling of Bittersweet Symphony. Andrew Loog Oldham, who had produced the orchestral recording, sued Klein, claiming he deserved more compensation from its use in advertising. David Whittaker, who arranged the Oldham orchestra version, said the whole ordeal made him a bit sick. Financially, the outcome was stark. By 2019, it was estimated that the song had earned at least $5 million in royalties for Jagger and Richards, money that would never reach Ashcroft or the Verve. The irony was striking. The Last Time itself had been adapted from a traditional gospel song sung by the Staple Singers. In other words, the original wasn't entirely original to begin with. The Bittersweet Symphony saga is far from unique. Music copyright cases often pit creativity against corporate control, with managers, estates, or publishing companies leading the charge, not the artists themselves. Take the recent Marvin Gaye estate lawsuit against Ed Sheeran. Marvin Gaye himself was not alive to claim his work was copied. It was his estate seeking financial gain. Similarly, in the Verve's case, it wasn't Jagger or Richards crying foul. It was Alan Klein, a manager no longer even connected to the band. Richard Ashcroft summed it up best. "I'm coming for that money. Someone stole like 50, God knows how much $1 million off me in 1997, and they still got it." For him, it was never just about royalties. It was about recognition for a song that had become much bigger than the legal wrangling surrounding it. Time, however, changes everything. When Alan Klein died in 2009, his publishing empire passed to his son, Jody Klein. Unlike his father, Jody seemed more open to reconciliation. In 2019, more than 2 decades after the song's release, Jody Klein reached out to Mick Jagger and Keith Richards to discuss resolving the long-standing injustice. The Stones agreed, finally returning the songwriting credit to Richard Ashcroft and allowing him to collect all future royalties. Ashcroft described the moment as liberating. For the first time in 22 years, Bittersweet Symphony was truly his. Still, there was a catch. None of the past earnings could be reclaimed. The millions generated during the height of its popularity were gone forever. By then, streaming had reshaped the music industry, making such royalties far smaller than they once were. But for Ashcroft, it was never about the money. "I just wanted it to be mine," he said. The story of Bittersweet Symphony is a cautionary tale about the fragility of artistic ownership in a business dominated by contracts and corporate interests. What began as a simple sample grew into one of the greatest anthems of the 1990s, only to be stripped away from its creator by ruthless legal maneuvering. And yet, the ending is, fittingly, bittersweet. Richard Ashcroft eventually reclaimed his song, but not the fortune it had generated. The song's lyrics, lamenting the struggles of modern life, "You're a slave to money, then you die," took on an eerie, literal meaning, as the track itself was enslaved by the machinery of the music industry. Today, Bittersweet Symphony stands not just as a Britpop classic, but as a symbol of both the vulnerability and resilience of creativity. It reminds us that art can endure, even when money and power threaten to crush it. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more music history that hits all the right notes.